This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, used to be as usual, but now is a rare occasion, everyone. I have Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Cristina Roach.
Hey, everyone.
And producer Pat.
Nice to hear your voices, guys.
Yeah, you too.
Oh, I just got goosebumps.
Although I guess I hear your voices most weeks, but yes. To hear them real time.
In real time, I know. Pat's like, you could call once in a while. So yes, due to various pandemic issues, some health issues from a variety of people, including myself, we've been finding it difficult to find times for simultaneous recordings, but we're doing one for you now, and we have missed it. We have a great show for you today. Just great. All the segments are absolutely amazing. Adam is going to talk to you about Chinese restrictions on online gaming for minors.
That's right.
That means young people, not people who work in mines. And Cristina is bringing all the classiness that she's been storing up over these months. Can we burp and fart at the same time? The perennial question.
I saved this one just for the four of us when we got together.
Yes.
Fantastic.
This is special occasions. And I am going to talk to you about generational labeling. So, talking about my generation? You know how the Gen Xers and Millennials like to listen to podcasts while the Zoomers are obsessed with TikTok? That's a trick question. I don't know what those categories mean. I have heard different definitions at different times, and I've always been a bit annoyed at these categories. It isn't clear what they are based on, or if they have predictive validity beyond broad trends that could be argued as true from a series of different definitions. What am I even talking about in this segment? Well, I'm talking about generational labeling itself. Biologically, a generation is in reference to the reproductive cycle of a species. While humans are often able to reproduce before 15, it seems they typically start to do so around 20 and keep reproducing into their 30s. Is this different in different countries? Sure is. Was it different in the past? Sure was, probably. Does socioeconomic status matter? Yes, given that some people are having no children at all. All that to say, for humans, a generation, in a reproductive sense, is often 20, 25 years.
Okay.
But in a cultural sense, a generation is... Do you have any idea, if you were asked, what is a cultural generation?
Is that a question that you want me to...
It is now. I'm looking at Adam, but I'm also looking at you in Toronto. You just can't see it.
To me, a generation, in the cultural sense, which I think has mixed value, relates to a group of people who were sort of aged in a certain cultural context, and that generation sort of generally ends or begins when there is a big enough societal change, cultural change, that's there are some kind of differences. I don't think that matches up to a parent-child generation, which obviously is a huge variable term.
It also sounds like from your definition, there'd be no consistent number.
Absolutely not. I think that number is going to be shorter in periods of greater change and longer in periods of more stagnant.
What about Pat and Cristina?
I would agree largely with what Adam said. I think music also plays a big role, as does fashion. So there are sort of stereotypical things that define the lost generation and the beat generation. So, I would agree, and I think that music is a big part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so cheugy of you, Darren, to be asking this question.
I'm also not surprised that the music people mention music, even though I agree. Music is a huge part of most generations, because that other music from that other generation is terrible, right? We all think that.
Right.
Exactly. I agree with Adam and Pat. I don't really have anything else to add. But yeah, it's something that sort of defines a certain age group that was born within a certain time period that have adopted certain, cultural preferences and ways of talking and music. And it's, yeah.
Yeah, and there's going to be gradations, and this is a multifaceted or complex variable itself. 'Cause sometimes I used to think it was like 3 to 5 years. And why I say that is, if you watched different TV shows and movies, you didn't have the same reference, cultural reference. But now it's like, well, do you even use the same medium to take in media or TV shows and movies. So maybe 3 to 5 is short, but it really is like, oh, if you were, like I would say 12 when Terminator 2 came out, that was really significant. Batman, when you're 10, Terminator 2, this is great. The 90s, there's certain things that happen at that time. When you're like 17, 20 when it comes out, well, it will still be an experience, but it's different. It's not a coming of age as much as the same thing, but you still have the same reference. Well, for someone else, like, yeah, you know, I saw that fourth Terminator movie and it wasn't good. You're like, yeah, I understand, but
the
that
fourth
hurts.
one's the worst one.
Right. Or somehow, or somehow not knowing that The Simpsons was great and was a pioneer compared to all the other things that followed. Anyway, so this leads to my main source for this segment, an open letter to the Pew Research Center on generational labels. The letter has over 150 signatures, but the main text was written by Philip N. Cohen, and I'll be quoting extensively. It starts with a statement, quote, "We are demographers and other social scientists writing to urge the Pew Research Center to stop using its generational labels, currently silent, baby boom, X, millennial, and Z. We appreciate Pew's surveys and other research and urge them to bring this work into better alignment with scientific principles of social research." The open letter then presents 6 supporting arguments. Number 1, Pew's generations cause confusion. So the groups Pew calls silent, baby boom, X, millennial, and Z are birth cohorts determined by year of birth, which are not related to reproductive generations. There's further confusion because of their arbitrary lengths, 18 years, 19, 16, 16, and 16
That's
years,
true.
respectively.
I never thought about that.
They've grown shorter as the age difference between parents and their children has lengthened.
Yes.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. Number 2, the division between generations is arbitrary and has no scientific basis. Well, there you go. With the exception of the baby boom, which was a discrete demographic event, the other generations, in quotes, have been declared and named on an ad hoc basis without empirical or theoretical justification. Pew's own research conclusively shows that the majority of Americans cannot identify the generations, always in quotes here, to which Pew claims they belong. Cohorts should be delineated by empty periods, such as individual years, equal number of years, or decades, unless research on a particular topic suggests more meaningful breakdowns. I found that pretty convincing.
Yes, very.
Number 3, naming generations and fixing their birth dates promotes pseudoscience, undermines public understanding, and impedes social science research.
Okay.
The generation, again in quotes, names encourage assigning them a distinct character and then imposing qualities on diverse populations without basis, resulting in the current widespread problem of crude stereotyping. Okay, boomer. This fuels a stream of circular debates about whether the various generations fit their associated stereotypes, which does not advance public understanding. And this is exactly what I observe. Number 4, the popular generations, again in quotes, and their labels undermine important cohort and life course research. Cohort analysis and the life course perspective are important tools for studying and communicating social science, but the vast majority of popular survey research and reporting on the generations uses cross-sectional data and is not cohort research at all. Predetermined cohort categories also impede scientific discovery by artificially imposing categories used in research rather than encouraging researchers to make well-justified decisions for data analysis and description. We don't want to discourage cohort and life course thinking, we want to improve it. Again, hard for me to disagree with this one because it's an improved call for methodological rigor and consistency. Number 5, the generations are widely misunderstood to be official categories and identities. Pew's reputation as a trustworthy social research institution has helped fuel the false belief that the generations' definitions and labels are social facts and official statistics. Many other individuals and organizations use Pew's definitions in order to fit with the paradigm, compounding the problem and digging us deeper into this hole with each passing day. Seems similar to the initial ones, but I think this deserves its own space because Pew's usage is then causing it to happen in a negative feedback sense. And number 6, the generation scheme has become a parody and should end. With the identification of Generation Z, or Z, Pew has apparently reached the end of the alphabet. Will this continue forever? With arbitrarily defined, stereotypically labeled generation names sequentially added to the list. Demographic and social analysis is too important to be subjected to such a fate. No one likes to be wrong, and admitting it is difficult. We sympathize. These are funny lines. Obviously, I'm quoting here. But the sooner Pew stops digging this hole, the easier it will be to escape. A public course correction for Pew would send an important signal and help steer research and popular discourse around demographic and social issues toward greater understanding. It would also greatly enhance Pew's reputation in the research community. We urge Pew to end this as gracefully as possible now. And that's, of course, more appeal to Pew's better nature and a call to action, but I still think it has value. I'll say my conclusion here, and then I'm curious what everyone else thinks. I was totally biased in favor of getting rid of current popular generation labels, and now I found good arguments to support my position. Thanks, confirmation bias. I kid, of course. Well, I was biased going in. It does seem that there are good reasons to stop using these terms and not many good reasons to keep using these terms. Yes, popular media will probably always use unscientific terminology, but that doesn't mean that great research institutions like Pew have to enable them.
Yeah, that's my conclusion here too, Darren, is that the labels are not going away. They're part of who we are. And, I'm Gen X. So when I talk to another Gen Xer, we're going to talk about reading the book Gen X. Or we're going to talk about, when grunge took over hair metal. We have kind of common threads, but an organization like Pew probably shouldn't be pushing that agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always thought of it as a fun thing. Nothing more than that. Nothing super serious. But considering everything you've said, Darren, it's true. It could actually, if it influences you in a way that you're pigeonholing people, then that's probably not a good thing, especially if they're seeking employment or, so.
Yeah, well, I think there is, there's ageism, both young to old and old to young.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying ageism goes away if we get rid of labels, but the labels probably enable ageism a bit more, especially the okay boomer, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, people do like shortcuts to understand the world, and it is a nice heuristic that you can group people broadly in similar ways. But for many people who fall on, the border between these popular levels or generations, it doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not really that. I'm not really the other thing. Also, there's so many different, we'll say, cultures or subcultures that people belong to.
Yeah.
It's not at all clear that these are representative. Sure, in the broad sense, like, oh, did you see that famous movie that everyone heard of? Right. But like maybe, the music you were into, other people weren't into. It just came out at that time. And then you're going to hang around with the people who are into your music, not the broad cultural aspect of it all.
Well, a lot of these things would be based on geography as well, right?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Again, also in this case, of course, American certain locations, right? Yeah. Because Midwest is not going to be New York, which is not going to be Texas, which is not going to be Missouri.
Yeah, I think ageism is a big part of it. And you're often really just talking about like old people talking about young people and young people talking about old people. Like, okay, boomer. People keep talking about like, oh, the boomers in the workforce, blah, blah, blah. Like, boomers, they're all retired. They're almost all retired. Like, what are you talking about? I think you got the wrong years here. So that's a problem. I agree that the labels are mostly useless, mostly because I fall between two. I think Xennial or Xennial is a label that people talk about for the sort of between X and Millennial, which seems to apply very closely to me. But I think it's very useful to be able to group people into a certain age range when we talk about social phenomenons and things like that. It's just the current labels people use aren't useful, right? And when we talk about like iGen, which is like people who grew up in the internet generation, but that's not even an official label that people use. It's like post-Gen Z. So I find that label is useful when you talk about social phenomenon that sort of dictated the way people act, but that's completely unrelated to these generational labels, which I think are kind of dumb.
And aside from, the slight falling birth rate, people have children continuously. That's what's so peculiar about this, right? So there is obviously a difference between someone who grew up with the internet versus someone who didn't. But in between all that, every year there were people partly growing up with the internet to some degree or not.
Yes.
And we'll just lump them all on one side and lump the other ones on the other side. There you go. It seems like a silly way of doing things.
So I'm an early adopter on the internet, so I'll have certain things that will maybe liken me to a millennial in some way, but like most of those traits, I don't feel that they reflect me, right? So it's complicated, obviously.
Speaking of generational issues, it seems like China is trying to restrict the gaming access of their young. Is this the case, Adam?
That's right. China banning video games for kids. Is this a 2019 article?
Yeah.
Well, it was. And it's also new. Since the last time news about China banning video games for children was so poorly covered by the mainstream media and video game blogs, I figured it was a good idea to look at this latest news to see how accurate that actually was. I assume some of you might have seen these news stories too.
We did.
Sure did.
Didn't you also cover this back when?
Yeah, it's deja vu.
I covered it in 2019, and that was a different one. Right. So to recap that original story, I did cover it on the show, and while a lot of sources mentioned that China was banning games for kids, except for certain limited hours in the day. They completely failed to mention how this was at all possible. In truth, the rules were simply to apply to online games. It's impractical to ban all video games in certain hours unless they're online, right? Unless you're doing it through the system.
You're in their home.
Yeah. There's probably ways to do it, but like you would need a huge government overreach, and what country could possibly do that?
Give it 20 years.
Yeah, it's possible. Like they could put something in your TV. There's a lot of things they could do, but we're not really there yet today. So back in 2019, the rules were 3 hours of games on weekends and stat holidays, 1.5 hours of gaming the other days, online games. There are also restrictions on play between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. And
that's peak time. Isn't that peak game playing time?
For some kids, yes, and that's what they're trying to avoid. So this is actually more permissive than my parents were back when I was a young Nintendo junkie. But I think, gaming has evolved a lot since what I was doing. So the new news is 1 hour of online games Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, as well as holidays. 0 hours any other days. No gaming on school nights.
Wow.
Yeah. Or so says MSN. But how did the mainstream media fare this time? Well, let's look up the source. I did what no one was doing in 2019. I dug up the original Chinese article, popped it into Google Translate. Not perfect, gives the idea. So a lot of the articles by mainstream media sources, I looked at the names of the authors. They were like Asian Chinese names. So I think a lot more people did their homework this time. So it's all there on the government of China's website for the world to see. So apparently I'm allowed to see their website, which is nice. It's a one-way blocking they're doing. TRCpodcast.com, no longer blocked in China. Just, side note. So thanks. Hi to all the listeners if you...
Give us 1 billion reviews on iTunes.
If we have listeners in China, I would love to hear from you. That would be amazing.
Yes. So the August 31st document is a notice of the National Press and Publication Administration on further strict management and practically preventing minors from indulging in online games. So that's Google translated, but that's basically what it says. The stated reasons for these restrictions are the problem with minors' overuse and indulgence of online games. The limitations are online game companies can only provide minors with 1 hour of online game services on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and holidays from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., like I mentioned before. So in this context, minors are people under the age of 18. So how are they going to do this? Well, online game providers require real name registration associated with their online game user accounts. You can't just sign up with, Cuboid or Chopperface or whatever. Games must be connected to the National Press and Publication Administration's online game anti-addiction real name verification system. These companies are not allowed to give access to their service without a real name. Families, schools, other social sectors are encouraged to take an active role in encouraging healthy habits for minors and encourage online literacy. That's just good advice. These restrictions are effective September 1st. They're going on. It's already happening. And there isn't much else to it. So since there had been similar but less strict restrictions in place going back 2 years now, the implementation doesn't become terribly difficult. They just kind of need to change the times where kids are allowed to play. When I originally covered this back in 2019, the specifics on how it would be implemented were unknown. So they were saying, okay, here's our sort of edict. You got to block online games during these certain times, but they didn't really have a mechanism in place to do it. And it was up to those online game providers to sort that out. There are also currently restrictions on the amount of money which minors can spend on games. I believe I mentioned this the last time as well. So according to Tencent, a Chinese video game vendor, a very popular one in China, the under 16 demographic in China only account for 2.6% of total spending. Encouraging, they aren't spending a ton of their money on these online games. I expected that games like Fortnite would have considerable numbers of minors playing outside of China, but when I looked it up, this demographic information for the game all starts at 18. It seems to miss that very important demographic, and it seems to be a limitation of what some surveys are allowed to collect as far as information, although the game is available to 13 plus. There are a ton of young people that play Fortnite and games.
Kidding.
Like
so that's like based on our limited ability to survey youth, it turns out no youth play this game.
Yeah. They're like, 60% of our gamers are 18 to 24. Like that's not true. There's no way. They're younger, but it's of the people over 18, the hugest amount are 16 or 18 to 24, right? So what's a Chinese minor to do? Well, they can follow the law. They can be nice and not play. Or they could easily log in with the information from an adult's account. Okay, so it's technically possible for a kid to use their parents, their older siblings, and older friends' login information they get into the game. And today, there's nothing that company or the Chinese government can do about that. So most articles got the story more or less right this time around. I was pretty impressed. I had a lot of bad things to say in 2019. Good job, mainstream media. In 2021, you did okay. There were still some minor issues. I found some examples of articles that made no distinction between online games and normal video games. So a lot of them really did mention it was online, but some of them were just like, China's banning video games except for 1 hour a day. Okay, you're going to take their Game Boy away? Like, what are you doing here? Some articles also didn't appreciate the specifics. For example, a Newsweek article gave an example of 2 children aged 4 and 8 who don't have smartphones but get their hands on their parents' iPad or phone and play online games for hours a day. And the article says, not anymore. How? These children are using their parents' device. They aren't logging in with their own names and accounts. They're playing 3 to 4 hours a day, which is already above the limits that are in place. So sorry, Newsweek. I don't think it's going to change the behavior for those children unless those parents attempt to be more involved in their children's lives and to restrict their own ability to use their devices. So some articles did mention facial recognition as a way to confirm the identity of the gamer. Such technology is not specifically mentioned in the government of China's stated restrictions. However, Tencent, who's responsible for most of the online gaming in China, has been working on this kind of technology. Some gamers are concerned about the privacy implications of such technology. They've done some tests and they have actually rolled it out in a limited way. While this technology does exist and could theoretically be implemented to enforce age restrictions, it is not directly tied to these current restrictions. So we can extrapolate. Maybe that's where it's going, but that has not been overtly stated yet. So all said, is this going to help? Is this going to help the state of online game addiction? Is this going to help the children of China? Well, stop minors from playing online games. This seems to be an approach which would have some effect, even if there are ways around it. But as a general way of curbing internet addiction, this might have a limited results as minors still have access to video sites and social media. So some state that any distraction from their studies could be addictive. This is certainly true about online games, but social media and short video services can be more habit forming than like watching TV, reading a novel, something like that. So the hysteria has been around for, a century, people talking about distractions from homework, but there are always like better ways to not do the thing that you should be doing. I think that's something all humans, young and old, struggle with, right?
Yeah.
Yes, the Chinese government is restricting online gaming for minors to only 1 hour from 8 to 9 p.m., Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. The news articles you may have read seem to have gotten the main idea pretty much correct this time. Personally, I found a much more effective way to limit someone's video game playing time is to have children.
It just seems so ham-fisted, though. Like no video games at all during the week. That seems a little bit much.
Well, and so much stronger than the restrictions which were already in place, which were already pretty severe. And we'll see how it goes. It's the idea of the harder you tighten your grasp, the more will slip through your fingers, right? Like this might be happening. Like, well, now you say I can't play at all on a weekday. Well, before maybe I was following your hour and a half, and now I'm just going to cheat and I'm going to play 5 hours. So there may be some unintended negative consequences, but it's also cultural, right? Like, I think that's the reaction people here would have, and I think that's the reaction I would have. There's a different sort of mentality in China about following what the government says and things like that, right?
So a couple things. I think it'll be interesting as a lot of things become more gamified. Virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality are coming in. And so the world starts to look a bit more like a video game in various ways.
Sure.
Yeah, it does. And so to what extent that might be interfered, like certain VR, you can relabel games as educational, right? So now it's not quite a video game. I'm doing something educational. I'm doing extracurricular learning with my colleagues. And they'll probably try to skirt that around because some games are really fun and they are mostly educational. Additionally, while they can't quite restrict people now, I do think it is plausible in the relatively near future that they'll have so much surveillance capabilities, it'll just happen. So I know already some places they do facial character recognition just to enter your apartment building.
Yes.
So you don't need your key. You just show up, it scans, door opens, right? And also it knows which floor you go to, and it knows which apartment's yours, and it knows which guests you have. And that's what we publicly know.
That's convenient, eh?
Yes, exactly. Yes. And of course, there's someone who monitors it, and that tracking software goes somewhere else. It does the thing. And then, well, did your electricity spike at all? Well, you were using some device in there, weren't you? Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, especially if and also in China, like the access to those games is heavily restricted, right? So if these games are mostly played from phones and tablets, well, they can have software on your phone and tablet that restrict
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Game consoles are sold in a very restricted way. Only few games are sold. Like there's already severe controls on these things. So it wouldn't be, it's.
To your point, you'd need a Game Boy with batteries.
Oh yeah. You'd need to
that would be something that, you
need to find something old. And then there were years where consoles were not sold in China at all. So it's not like they have a huge PS3 market around there, right?
That's interesting.
And I think increasingly, Adam, you know better than I, but like games that aren't quote unquote online or don't have an online element still phone home before they'll let you play.
Yes, yeah. So there's a lot of systems that'll require that, right? So if I buy a Nintendo Switch game that is digital, then it'll need to authenticate online to let me play. Well, it depends. There's primary device, secondary device, and stuff like that. But you could easily have the government mandating that any game phone home just to be sold in China or something like that. You could easily tweak what's going on today. And
especially that ET game.
That ET game was actually pretty fun. But yeah, and the other side is just the most addictive games are online games. And it's most of the games that people play, and it's most of what they're concerned about. So I think that it covers it, right?
So now that we've gotten the fluff out of the way, we want to get to that hard-hitting topic that Cristina has been pondering for, I guess, the whole pandemic. Can someone burp and fart at the same time?
Or at least since I saw this article that I came across. Now, there's a fun column at mentalfloss.com titled Big Questions, and it takes on interesting, not so serious topics we may be curious about. So things like, why do golf balls have dimples? And where does the phrase tying the knot come from? Clearly, the title Big Questions is tongue-in-cheek. Now, in March, writer Alvin Ward took on what may be the biggest question of all. Is it possible to burp and fart at the same time? Or as he asks, would this feat create some kind of gastronomic pressurized vacuum that would turn us inside out, or worse, make us explode?
I guess these are real possibilities if you're 7 years old.
Make a wormhole?
Yeah, exactly. Is that what a wormhole is? I think so.
Now, surprisingly or not, it's not easy to find much corroborating info or research in this area. The Urban Dictionary, the crowdsourced online dictionary for slang, calls this a FERP. When a person farts and burps at the same time or at about the same time, or whenever fart and burp happen at the same time or at about the same time. Here it is in a sentence. Are you sure you want to have Taco Bell for lunch? You know that makes you FERP.
Ferp, 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 ferp. Wasn't it that song?
It also defines a FERP as a burp that smells like a fart, or whenever you eat a food that has high concentrations of methane producing biodegradables. As an aside, if you try to search the word FERP, which I did, it brings up a few hits about a gentleman known as FERP who was a beloved member of the furry community who died in a motorcycle accident. Did you guys know there's a site called WikiFur?
Well, could I have guessed there is?
Yeah.
That's a sad story no matter what.
Well, now you know, Darren. You're a better person for knowing that now.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but okay.
On that last point about burps that smell like farts, that phenomenon, if you will, is called a sulfur burp, which, as the name suggests, is a burp with a foul, rotten egg smell. That smell is a hydrogen sulfide or H2S gas. Now, this can happen for various reasons. Gastrointestinal issues like acid reflux, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, or bacterial infections. It can also happen from eating certain foods like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, garlic, or drinking beer. H2 gas is produced when bacteria in the oral cavity and gastrointestinal tract break down food, resulting in flatulence or very foul belching.
Interesting. So it's like a fart, only it's higher up in the intestinal tract, so it ends up coming out the other side.
Yeah, and it smells really bad. Now, first, it's helpful to understand why we burp or fart in the first place. Mayo Clinic site defines belching as our body's way of expelling excess air from the upper digestive tract. Most belching is caused by swallowing excess air, which accumulates in the esophagus. The esophagus has two muscular rings at the top and bottom known as esophageal sphincters, and these work to close the esophagus when we're not swallowing food. Now, Ward mentions that when we eat and swallow, we typically ingest about a tablespoon of air at the same time, along with swallowing air throughout the day, just randomly. Now, when we swallow excess air, the esophageal sphincters relax and let that air buildup escape through your mouth. So you may find that you burp a lot when you drink pop because the carbon dioxide mixes with the air and it makes your burps more notable. Now, flatulence happens when gas builds up in the intestines. It's caused by the digestion or fermentation of undigested food by bacteria found in the colon, and it's a normal part of digestion. Not all farts are as malodorous as the others. Gases like methane or from foods like beans, aka the magical fruit, that aren't easily broken down can result in some pretty stinky zingers. Now, while burping...
Zingers, the scientific term.
Yeah.
Generation Zinger.
Now, while burping is an act of the upper gastrointestinal tract, farting is an act of the lower gastrointestinal tract. As Ward explains, quote, "It's possible for a fart to escape out of the mouth if it's held for too long, at which point gas will be reabsorbed by the body and subsequently exhaled. And the air that could turn into a burp can be passed into the small intestine and the large intestine, creating a flatulent event."
Well, so the second one made sense to me. I didn't know about the former, and that's concerning.
So don't hold in your... I guess I'd
how
rather
long?
Fart than burp out a fart smell.
It's like there's a pocket of gas in your stomach at some point. It says, you take the high road and I'll take the low road.
Okay, but can we expel air from both ends at the same time? The short answer is technically yes. It's not impossible, but in reality, it's pretty rare to burp and fart at the exact same time. Both functions involve putting pressure on your abdominal cavity to push that air out, but these are different muscle contractions. The upper abdomen contracts to expel air from your stomach, and the lower abdomen contracts to pass gas. Now, many queries on the interwebs also ask if you can explode and die if you sneeze and fart at the same time. Seriously, sneeze and just if you Google that, you'll see. It's crazy. Now, although it seems you can technically sneeze and fart at the same time, it's way more likely that it just feels like it's happening simultaneously. The pressure you put on your abdomen from sneezing, or coughing for that matter, basically releases the gas that's already present.
So
there you
you're
go.
saying they're close in time, but there's like a few milliseconds or a second or two of difference,
Right.
when you're doing. Because yeah, for sure, I've sneezed and caused a fart, but I guess it's questionable.
I like how politely you and caused a fart.
I like how you said it's questionable. This whole thing is questionable.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so there you go.
Well, thank you, Cristina. And thank you for joining us, listeners. I talked to you about how the generational labels by the Pew Research Center don't make that much sense. Adam talked to us about the restrictions on video games of youths in China, which seem to be a real thing. And Cristina talked to us whether you can burp or fart at the same time. And the answer seems to be yes, if you apply yourself. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, Q-Boys.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Hey, kid, pull my finger.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Okay, well,
Let's hit it.
All right.
we waited this long. We can't
Let's
wait
talk
any
about
longer.
the important stuff now.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that your segments are over.
Exactly.
If you want to burp and fart at the same time, it's easy. You just need both to be occurring at the same time.
You just got to want it. I mean, look, people, you got to achieve your goals. And I don't know what you were doing during the pandemic, but clearly you should have been working out on your different stomach muscles.
I'm trying to think of what muscles one would need to work on to do this. I'm very curious. I want to try this, obviously.